Hey guys, Prez here, and today we're looking at another Talishar game. Today we've got Betsy, and the recording got cut off a little bit, and I just started after playing out turn 0. So let's talk about the sideboarding first. This is the loop configuration of the matchup. This was a slightly older list, so the only change you'll see from the current list that I've been putting out with these videos as 3 Celestial Cataclysm, and this was back when you just needed to respect the mirror a little bit more. Which, you know, post-tome ban, that's less of a problem now, and we can be a little bit more greedy with our deck slots. Cataclysm is a fine card. It's a 7 power popper, it blocks 3, it's light for Genesis, and it gives you a little bit of reach in the late game. But I've found in the past that it's more helpful when things start to go wrong than when things go right. And when they go right, you know, your best case scenario with it is sometimes just putting it in your soul with Genesis. Otherwise, we're bringing in all of our auras. We want to go up to 15 in total. We've got 3 Genesis, 3 Merciful, 3 Pierce, 3 Passing, and 3 Arc Light Sentinel. These just help us keep our opponent off, well, us. We want our opponent to hit our auras instead of us in our face, just to really preserve our life total and keep it high enough and create this game state where if they don't deal with the auras, they will lose to them. It's just that simple. Throughout the game, we get the opportunity to play Library out. Library is really, really important for this loop configuration. And if you've gone and watched my first video on how to Arc Light Sentinel Loop without Tome of Divinity, you'll see that you need Library in play to be able to do that on this version. There are ways you can get around that, usually involving Genesis and running Vestige, but this version of the loop doesn't depend on having a Genesis in play, which is something I really like. I'm all about flexibility. I'm all about being able to choose whatever lines you want to choose throughout a game. And being able to just play Genesis out and force your opponent to respect it really plays into that idea. On to the gameplay now. Our opponent went first and made the crucial mistake of using their action point turn 0. They just swung with Hammer for 4. We got to block 3, take 1, and then play a Genesis out. We draw up, and on our first turn we get a double aura turn of Genesis and Passing Mirage. This is a bit of a high roll, and for the most part, once you get to higher levels of play with your opponents that know how to approach the matchup a little bit better, your opponents should be holding their action point turn 0 when they play into Prism. And it's just because it's so back-breaking when your Prism opponent gets to drop an aura turn 0 and then draw back up, and you just can't deal with it. We're going to continue just playing auras when we draw them. We've drawn all 3 Genesis in the first 3 or 4 hands of the game and gotten them all out very, very quickly. It's really important to just be able to drop 2 Spectres in a turn cycle as often as possible. These are the turns that really punish your opponent's ability, or rather lack of ability, to generate action points. Every single time you drop 2 Spectres, you're going to start your turn with 1 of them in play. Because there are slightly fewer Spectra in this deck than we could otherwise run, this loop package is very much trimmed. It's as small as possible in order to achieve what it has to achieve. It means that when I only draw a single Spectra aura, I'll often just not play it. Chuck it in Arsenal, wait for a second, and really abuse these double Spectra turns as the turns that matter. We used our first Arc Light Sentinel there just to keep our 2 Genesis in play, and I did that just because it's really important to be able to cycle through your deck as quickly as possible. Because of the way our loop works, I want the deck to be as small as possible, as quickly as possible, while maintaining a high blue count, or rather a high blue to yellow ratio. Additionally, it helps you find your important cards more quickly and gives you more opportunities to get your cards in Soul, get your Heralds in Soul, play your Library out, play your Spectra auras. You know, we're drawing cards off Genesis. Drawing cards is always nice. Additionally, we're slowly going to try and build up our wall of blue Spectras behind the ones that are more important and that our opponent has to deal with. But every single time that we have an opportunity to use Arc Light and just draw another 6 cards, that's a pretty good trade. We're at the point in the game where we're starting to miss Spectra in our hands that are coming up. This is to be expected. We drew a lot of them early game. But at this point, it doesn't really matter. All I care about is keeping Library turned on and churning through our deck as quickly as possible. Keeping library turned on is actually really easy to do when you've got access to footsteps. You just throw 2 heralds a turn, demand 2 poppers, get 2 yellows in the pitch zone. You take 2 high-powered cards out of their hand, and that, in combination with the need to deal with Spectra, stops your opponent hitting you well. Here we're actually going to use Halo in combination with Reprimand just to get another card in Sol. Being able to combine them for a neg3 once per game is actually pretty nice, and means that you can get around even these 8-power Guardian blues. Instead of playing this Pierce Reality, I wonder if I should have awoken Soraya and attacked with it here, but it would have meant pitching a blue Spectra away. And just being able to stack these Pierce Realities as well while we've still got access to Dreamweavers is really, really strong. We didn't turn Library on last turn, so it's really important that we turn that back on as soon as possible to continue the snowball. Drawing that Merciful Retribution last turn off the Ponder token is really nice because it means, again, we just get another card in Sol, we get some more chip damage in. Getting that chip damage in is really important over the course of the game. But most importantly, we give our opponent another yellow Spectra that they have to deal with, because if they don't, we've got half a dozen shields in play, we've got 2 Pierce Realities in play, and every single time they pop a Herald, it just goes straight to our Sol and deals damage anyway. We don't really care too much about the damage. Our loop is more than enough damage to kill them. We just care about getting that card in Sol. Having 10 already means that we're actually pretty close to being able to loop at a moment's notice. Our opponent, they just have to deal with Merciful. They can't leave it in play while we've got the access to this many shields and while we still have this many Figments left in the deck. Unfortunately, we missed and we just didn't draw 2 yellows, which is pretty uncommon in our extremely high yellow count deck. That's still fine. We can awaken Soraya, attack, draw 2 cards, and just get another yellow in our hand. Missing on 2 yellows and 5 cards, isn't that uncommon? Well, it's still pretty uncommon. It's 3% or less, I think, off the top of my head. But missing on 2 yellows in 7 cards should be basically 0. Here we drew a really, really good combination. We still have Dreamweavers up, so we can actually just play this Arc Light Sentinel out, play the 3rd Pierce Reality and Arsenal Herald of Erudition to be able to get our best force multiplier available, along with +6 from our blue Spectras and Dreamweavers to take away Phantasm. Additionally, it also guarantees that we get to attack with Soraya a second time and draw 4 cards in 1 turn cycle. Remember, all we care about is churning through the deck, finding our pieces as quickly as possible, and being able to start our loop as quickly as possible. I did think about it for a while here. Playing loop games is pretty mentally taxing, don't get me wrong. It is a lot more involved than just being able to play 7-4-7 and throw heralds every single turn. But eventually, I think we do end up just playing out this Arc Light Sentinel, stacking the 3rd Pierce Reality and committing to using Dreamweavers next turn. You're balancing all of these different things in your head when you think about lines in Prism. Like even here, choosing between these blue Spectras is not particularly easy. But in context of the amount of armor that our opponent has left, I think getting this 3rd Pierce Reality in play is really important. Most likely, it will just stay there until the end of the game, and that's something to really keep in mind. Our next turn, we get to start just with attacking for Soraya, drawing 2 cards. This is the only thing I'll really trade Sol for. There's just nothing else that's as helpful to your primary game plan of establishing Sol and getting the loop. We just want to churn through the deck again, find those important pieces, get the cards in Sol as quickly as possible. Additionally, chip damage is really helpful. The more chip damage we get over the course of the game, the easier it is to loop. You don't need it. Your loop should be enough damage to kill your opponent in the full configuration. But, every bit of chip damage you get lowers the ceiling that's required. It makes it easier to loop when you finally pull the trigger. These 3 Pierce Realities in combination with Dreamweavers means that this Erudition is hitting pretty much no matter what our opponent has. I don't think many people are going to be running stuff like Staunch Response into Prism these days. And getting them down to 23 while taking away the vast majority of their armor suite does actually mean that we're ready to pull the trigger on the loop at pretty much any opportunity. We didn't really draw much else to do, which is actually okay here. We can do something a little bit cheeky instead and throw this yellow Herald of Triumph. It does demand a 7+, which is, that's valuable. Also demanding, or rather threatening a reprimand is something that's impactful. But if our opponent does block this out with a big boy, then we just get to pay for footsteps because we haven't used it this turn, use all the cards in our hand, cycle, play the final Herald, demand another card, and then arsenal this Arc Light. And with this Arc Light and arsenal, we're basically ready to go for the loop. We've got our Figments in play, we've got 10 Sol. It's not a huge amount, I'd prefer that 12 that I talked about, and I'd prefer to take a lot more time to set up and make sure I know where all the blues are in my deck. But honestly, our opponent's on 23, they've got 5 block left on their armor, we've got 28 life to get through. It's honestly not that much, I don't think we need the full loop here. It's also pretty important to limit test. Going for the loop here without having access to the full loop or knowing where all the blues are means that we get punished if we can't scale the loop properly in the first few hands. But it's where the strength of things like Tunic really starts to show, where even just drawing a single blue means that we get to have a scaling turn within the loop. Additionally, there are only 26 cards left in our deck. Because of my sideboarding, I know that there aren't any reds in there, and drawing a single blue alongside Tunic is enough to continue scaling. Our blocking hasn't been under much pressure this game, so I've been able to preserve blues in the deck as much as possible. And additionally, 28 life, it's pretty important to see whether or not we can actually get through that without a perfect loop. If you can't, then you know in the future that you need to continue setting up, you need to pitch stack the rest of your loop properly, and you need to set up those hands of 2 yellows and 2 blues. Using Tunic here to fill the gap and be able to play this Passing Mirage alongside a loop turn is actually really important. It's one of those small decisions that will come back to, well, be really impactful later in the game. This is a way that you can also hedge having an imperfect loop. Having 3 Pierce Realities, which I said they would stay in play until the very end of the game, and putting a Passing Mirage alongside them means that if we do ever break the loop or get forced to break the loop, we've just got a really potent board state behind it anyway. That represents 6 value on our already overstated attacks that our opponent can't interact with properly with Phantasm. This is after the loop, this is after we've already just pinged away their life total a lot, gotten rid of the rest of their armor, forced some cards out of them, and then, off a yellow, we're going to start throwing Heralds for 12 without Phantasm, with Wraths available. You can see how that'll get really difficult to deal with. Regardless, we're going to proceed through the loop, continue playing cards, getting those 2 yellows, scaling where possible. We're pretty lucky to draw these double blues. Like I said, I just didn't know where they are, but I knew what the ratio of blues to yellows in my deck was. Here we've just drawn a whole bunch of yellows, so that means we don't get to scale this turn, we just get to play an Arc Light Sentinel, attack with Avalon, pass back. But again, those 3 Pierce Realities, that Passing Mirage, they're representing the late game threat for when this loop is over. It means that it just doesn't really matter that we only have 6 cards in our Sol. We get to just chip away at their life total. We've got a little bit more armor, still 4 more to go. We've only actually dealt 1 damage here. 2 more coming through with the Celestial Belting block. This is why it's really important to know where your blues are so that you can scale your loop properly. Again, you'll see that we've just drawn a hand of yellows, which means we can continue the loop, but that we can't scale it to kill our opponent properly this turn. Regardless, we'll put pretty much any yellow we see off this Light of Sol into our Sol here, and that's just because we only care about sustaining the loop at this point. Every card we put in our Sol off Light of Sol is a yellow we don't have to draw later, which increases our blue to yellow ratio in deck, and means that we get to continue and try for 1 more hand. We've got Tunic back up, which means that we only need a single blue in our hand to start scaling, and the first point of scaling is often the most important. Going from 4 to 5 is really impactful. And I have drawn a red. This genuinely wasn't meant to be in the deck. I'm not sure how it happened, but it must have just been a mistake in sideboarding. I remember this happening while I was playing this game. But regardless, we've got Tunic, which means we can actually just throw this Erudition, get 2 more cards, get some yellows, And the way I deal with it is just arsenaling the red. It's going to be a really good follow-up when our loop eventually breaks, but it's not meant to be in the deck in the first place. If it was a yellow, if it was a blue, we would have been able to scale this turn instead of having to throw Erudition and drawing some additional cards to make the loop work. We use Tunic regardless, but it's not ideal. Get some more damage through, we get a good chunk of the rest of their armor, they've only got 1 left, and all of a sudden they're down to an effective life of only 15. From here, we're pretty much just going through the motions. I'm pretty sure we're just going to play out this Avalon attack and then play out this Arc Light off Tunic and arsenal this Red War-Tune Herald and try for the next hand. We've only got 5 cards left in Sol, so we do need to start, well, continue to scale the loop. You'll notice that we still haven't put a single counter on our Angels. Despite that, we have also just dealt a lot of damage. I haven't been tracking fully how many cards our opponent has been blocking with, but they've probably been leaking damage when they shouldn't be. Even if you're just blocking for 1 or 2 value, in this scenario against Prism, where, you know, they've only got 5 cards in Sol, there is an end to the loop coming. It's probably better just to get even 2 value, even 1 value off a card, and just try to last, or rather, outlast. We haven't drawn blues, we shuffled the deck because that Herald of Erudition hit last turn, which unfortunately means that we're just continuing to attack for 4, we're still not scaling the loop. Our opponent is still leaking damage though, because for some reason they want to hold cards that they're not going to get to block with. In all fairness, they don't know that they're not going to get to block with those cards because they don't know that we haven't drawn blues. This is a really good example of how even within the loop you can play off hidden information a lot. Your opponent doesn't know what you have access to unless they're also watching your pitch stack, but every time you fetch a Figment you reset that pitch stack, which means it's just really important to wait as long as possible and know where your blues are, or at the very least have a small deck size and have a good blue to yellow ratio. You'll see I got a little bit excited on that hand. We finally drew double blue, which means we can start scaling the loop. Additionally, we're going to have Tunic up for the next turn cycle, which means that we will be able to scale the loop, or rather continue scaling the loop, if we draw just a single blue. With only 24 cards left in the deck now, it's pretty likely. We're just slowly bleeding yellows out of our deck so that we draw them less often. We're now at the point where our opponent has to leak damage. We're throwing 5/5 every turn. They have to hold a card to clear Arc Light Sentinel, so they can block for 3/2 and 3. They're going to leak a minimum of 2 damage every turn. And when you're on these low life totals like they are now, without much more armor available, it's just a death sentence. We're going to continue to scale here, drawing this single blue with Tunic. This has allowed us to fill the gaps, and now all of a sudden they're going to start leaking a minimum of 3 per turn. And additionally, if they ever block too much, we just get to start throwing Heralds, and life gets a lot easier. In fact, I think here we've almost got enough of a window, so like this is, if we throw this Red War-Tune here, it would be coming in for 13 without Phantasm. 13 without Phantasm. They have to block, yeah, so I think this is actually a miss-lethal. They would have had to give 6 block from hand plus their armor for 7 to still take 6, and then we could have just hit them with the Angel afterwards. But it is what it is. At this point, the game is pretty much in garbage time. I'm pretty sure I could take near random game actions and the game would be pretty much over. All of our Heralds are turned on with Passing Mirage and 3 Pierce Realities. Our Angels are turned on, we've run out of Sol, but that just, again, doesn't matter. There's no way they can get through this turn right at the end, and this is why I really tried to get those 3 Pierce Realities in play, and then make sure to set up that Passing Mirage before we ended the loop. Always say good game to your opponent, it's just good manners. I hope this helps for people that are still a little bit unsure about how to execute the loop without Vestige of Sol. But this game is a really good demonstration of how your loop doesn't have to be perfect. You get a lot of chip damage over the course of the game. You've got tricks, you've got your Dreamweavers, you've got access to Dominate. Even into these classes with incredibly strong armor suites, you can just get a lot of damage through. Regardless, when you start your loop, it doesn't have to be perfect. Half the time they will leak life regardless. and especially once you start scaling your loop, they start to leak damage every single turn. If I needed to, if I didn't high roll so early with all 3 copies of Genesis, I would have been able to wait a lot longer, go for another pitch cycle through the deck, just continue demanding their high power cards so that they can't really kill us by throwing 2 heralds a turn, sometimes 3, continue demanding action points with the rest of our blue Spectres, and then getting to the point where our deck is a lot smaller, we don't have any figments in there, and our blues just really contribute to being able to pull off a full loop. I didn't need that this game, so this was a really helpful limit test to be able to show that, hey, maybe you don't always need the full loop. Maybe sometimes just hitting your opponent for 4 over and over and over until you draw enough blues to scale is good enough. Hope this helps, guys. This has been another Prez Practices. Cheers.